All right, welcome everyone. My name's Adam Leonard. I'm with Google's People Development Department, and I'm happy to introduce and to welcome Jake Breeden today to introduce and to talk about his new book, Tipping Sacred Cows: Kick the Bad Work Habits That Masquerade as Virtues. So Jake teaches as part of the faculty, global faculty for Duke Corporate Education, which is one of the world's top-ranked providers of custom corporate education. And it's taken him around the world to over 27 countries, consulting with numerous corporations, including Google. So he did work coaching and challenging leaders as part of Google's Business Academy. And so I'm particularly interested in Jake's talk today because one of the things he's going to do in Tipping These Sacred Cows is challenge many of the things that we hold to be important around here: collaboration, creativity, and we're also, in my experience so far, we're good at holding ambiguity. And so, I think I'm welcoming Jake's challenge to see what kind of the other side of some of these things that we hold to be sacred. So, welcome, Jake.
Thank you. Thank you. When you were young, you probably preferred simple flavors, simple textures. I don't know, lemonade, rice, simple tastes, simple flavors when you were young, perhaps. Candy, cola. And as you've gotten a little bit older, you've begun to crave more complex flavors, seemingly paradoxical flavors of like a briny caviar that's also savory, or a dark chocolate that's bittersweet, or a wine for some of you, like an earthy Bordeaux wine, more complex flavors. In the same way that our mouths crave more complex tastes as we age, our minds crave more complex ideas. Young minds crave simple ideas. They crave ideas, but putting things into buckets and understanding where the pieces fit, what piece fits in what bucket. And as our minds mature, we begin to crave more ideas in the same way that our mouths crave more complex tastes. And a complex idea that leaders especially crave, and especially successful leaders crave, are paradoxical ideas. There's a pretty striking piece of research that looked at folks along a broad set of companies, a broad set of industries, a broad set of countries, and said, what separates people who stay in the middle management level from folks who move up to the top? That was the research question that they asked, and there are many answers, but somewhat surprisingly, the thing that stood out was the preference for paradox. That the most successful leaders have brains that don't just deal well with paradoxical ideas, but crave them in the same way that our palates might crave a complex tastes. I want to share with you today 3 paradoxes, and I'll present 3 paradoxes for your consideration. These are the 3. First, that to have more excellence, you must have less excellence. And in particular, to have more excellence in the things that matter most, you must have less excellence where it doesn't matter as much. Being purposeful about the way you think about standards. Second, that to have more collaboration, you must have less collaboration. And what I mean is to have more collaboration where it counts, where it leads to the things that you need more of, the kind of innovation that you need more of, for example, the business results that you need more of. You actually need less collaboration in other areas, in other places. And we'll talk about the problem of too much collaboration. And we'll talk in particular about the way that virtue, like collaboration, tends to act as a mask. It prevents us from seeing what's really going on, which we're excusing away bad behavior. We say, hey, I'm collaborating, I'm playing well with others, I'm doing what I should be doing, when actually it's masking some bad behavior. In this particular case of collaboration, not collaborating with the kinds of folks who could be more productive for you. And the third paradox we'll look at is that to be more creative, you must be less creative. And in particular, we'll talk about the the way that needless creativity, narcissistic creativity, saps energy from the pragmatic creativity that you actually need to get things done. So this interplay between the good excellence and the bad excellence, the good collaboration and the bad collaboration, and the good creativity and the bad creativity, that's how we'll spend about the next 25 minutes. And in each of them, I'll do a bit of setup, and I'll get you talking with somebody next to you to see if you can uncover some times where you've fallen into the trap of the bad. And then I'll have a bit of Q&A, and I'll leave you with one last thought, and sign a few books, and all of this will be done by, let's say, 5 minutes to 2. Ready to go? All right, let's start with excellence. So I'm going to give you a piece of data, and then together let's make some meaning from the data, and then let's see if we can go from the meaning to a recommendation. So here's the data. There's a woman named Emerald Archer who did her PhD at UC Santa Barbara in political psychology. She studied female Marines at Camp Pendleton, a Marine base outside of San Diego. And she was interested in one question, which is, why do female Marines underperform their male companions, their male colleagues, their male peers on the rifle range? Right? So she studies performance of Marines on the rifle range, looking at performance by gender to try to answer this question. You know, what is it? And she did the following test. Her hypothesis was that when the female Marines were primed to think of the test as a test of gender, they would perform worse than if they didn't think of it as a test of gender, that if gender didn't matter. And so what she would do is she would, in one condition, she would prime the female Marines before they would go to the rifle range and shoot at, by the way, 500 meters, right? So this is incredibly long distance when they're shooting in the rifle range at Camp Pendleton. And in one condition, she would prime the women, the Marines, to say, you know, there's a lot of research that says women, you know, here's the data, women tend to underperform at sort of 85%, shoot at about 85% the success rate of their male colleagues. This is a test of that. Let's see how we do. And then the other group, she had only women, but she didn't tell them that this was a test of a gender at all. It was made to seem as if it's random, that you just happen to be 4 women there shooting at a range. There are no men around, and there was no priming around gender. And in fact, when there was no priming and when there was only women there, they shot at exactly the same level as men, much higher than they had been shooting before. So, you know, she presents her research, and it's quite clear that when primed to think of the test as a test of gender, they underperformed the other scenario when they weren't primed to think of it as a test of gender. So that's the data. What do you think is going on there? What's your interpretation of that?
So when you're primed, that certain condition is going to be met. Like you're more likely to be shooting that condition, even if you don't have experience on that.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially. So, okay. Any other ideas? Self-fulfilling prophecy 1. What else? Same data. Any other ways to interpret the data? Yep.
It could be where they're getting measured on other variables, and so they're focused, like the idea that they're focusing a little bit less on like actual shooting the rifle because they're focusing on excellence in other areas, I presume.
Oh, I see. So this would be the psychological concept there is crowding out. So they're focused on these other areas, these other variables that actually don't help the performance in the tested condition, right? So I'll share with you Emerald's point of view, what she says. And this is one of these things where nobody knows what the real answer is. We know what the data is. When you go to interpretation, this is a matter of theory and interpretation. But I'll tell you hers. So Emerald Archer, studying at UC Santa Barbara, I interviewed her about this test. It turns out she grew up outside of Camp Pendleton as a little girl. Her father was a contractor. And he worked building barracks on the Marine base. And he would often have Marines over for picnics. And so she said typically on a Saturday or Sunday we might have several Marines grilling out, having a picnic. And she said at a young age, she says, this is her talking, I noticed the following thing, that the women would sort of take care of things at this picnic. They would pick up after the guys, they would get the beers or clean up. And she said, as a young woman, as a young girl, this seemed ridiculous to me. And she said, I even noticed that when the women outranked the guys, that gender ended up being a greater predictor of this sort of social subservience than rank. So you would literally have higher ranking Marines sort of taking care of things. So she became, at a young age, you can picture this young woman, she's focused on that, and she dedicates her career to trying to understand this, and it becomes the focus of her PhD dissertation. Here's Emerald's. Emerald's thought is that it's essentially along the lines of the crowding out, that the cognitive load of worrying about this category, in this case women, the cognitive load of worrying about this category robs the Marines of the cognitive attention they need to give to this act of shooting. And this falls more broadly under an area called stereotype threat. And it's been shown, for example, with student athletes. You go to universities and you get a set of student athletes and you prime them to think of themselves primarily as student athletes, and it says it's shown that student athletes tend to underperform their colleagues who aren't student athletes on standardized tests. Now take the standardized test. And sure enough, the notion of I want to prove it ends up being paramount. And by the way, the anecdotes supported the notion. When she would interview the female Marines who were engaged in these tests in which they'd been primed, they would say things like, I was going to make sure that this false stereotype that we can't shoot as well as a man was disproven. And this one woman in the study, she went on to say, but unfortunately I did the opposite. Unfortunately I did the opposite. And unfortunately I did the opposite is kind of the theme to the study, to the book. Unfortunately, I did the opposite. It's the unintended consequence. So we're still in excellence, this first paradox, and the punchline is to get to an excellent destination. Sometimes you have to take a meandering path and lower the stakes, lower the standards. So think about this now. Think about yourself. Think about perfectionism. Think about times when you're working hard to prove something. This is when it's especially dangerous, when you need to prove a point to yourself or to someone else, to maybe it's part of a class that you belong to that's perceived to be as strong. It's shown, we have this insight that the cognitive load, it simply becomes overbearing, your need to prove that you can do this thing well. And unfortunately, the opposite, but you end up proving the opposite true, unfortunately. Before I get you to talk to a neighbor about how, what are you trying to prove and to whom and how does it get in your way of performance, I want to give you a glimmer of hope, of light, an example, a success story of this, what I would propose is a healthy use of excellence, a healthy use of high standards. And it's in your neighborhood, in your neck of the woods with Pixar. So raise your hand if you saw the movie Aladdin. Did anybody see the movie Aladdin? Not a Pixar film. Look around, most of you saw Aladdin. Raise your hand if you saw not the first sequel to Aladdin, but the second sequel to Aladdin. It was called Aladdin, King of Thieves. Raise your hand if you saw Aladdin, King of Thieves. Okay, one person, two people saw Aladdin, King of Thieves. All right. Now, the next piece of data here, raise your hand if you saw the movie Toy Story. Okay, pretty much everybody. Now, but this is the money question. Raise your hand if you saw Toy Story 3. Okay, also, like about 60% of the people. So what I would want to shine a spotlight is, if we're doing bar charts here, the drop-off between Aladdin and Aladdin King of Thieves was from here to there. The drop-off between Toy Story and Toy Story 3 was here to there a little bit. Actually, Toy Story 3 did more at the box office than Toy Story. Toy Story 3 is the most successful Pixar film to date, commercially and arguably critically, because it was nominated for Best Picture, not just Best Animated, but Best Picture. So here's the point. Pixar has an attitude that says even our sequels, we will reject the old Disney approach of let's sweat the asset, meaning we invested a lot in Lion King, we invested a lot in Aladdin, now let's invest much, much less. We'll go direct to video, and we're just going to get returns off of the second sequel, the third sequel. We'll invest a little bit, but we'll make a little bit more, and it's okay. Pixar rejects that. Pixar says everything we do is going to be excellent. Every single thing we do is going to be excellent. Well, doesn't it sound like the notion of being at a rifle range saying it must be excellent? Here's the difference. The habit they have every single day is you share incomplete work. Imagine you're an animator. You're 23 years old. You get your dream job working at Pixar as an animator, and it's 4 o'clock on your first day, and you gather around and, okay, let's share what you worked on so far, and you're going to be asked to share with somebody who just won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature last year. It could be intimidating. And the first day it is intimidating, but here's what the leaders do. They build a habit of sharing incomplete work. So it takes the sting of shame out of incompletion. It takes the sting of shame out of rough progress. They get more rough drafts, rough drafts, more progress, more willingness to just put your stuff out there, put yourself out there. They lower the stakes. Instead of raising the stakes and say, this must be good, they lower the stakes and they say, let's just get more and more drafts, more reps, more versions out of this thing. Let's create a culture where it's a habit. It's not a big deal. You just share your stuff. That's just what we do. And as a result, they have a better shot. No guarantee. There's no guarantees in anything artistic, like trying to make a successful film. No guarantees. The same process that he used in Toy Story 3, they used in Brave to less success. It still made money, but not at the level of Toy Story 3. But what it does is it increases the chances that you'll achieve excellence in the end. So here's what I want you to do now. I'm going to invite you to talk to one person in the room here. So find a group, so group of 2, maybe groups of 3, and just have this chat. When do we ever fall into the trap of unhealthy excellence, of high standards that don't help? Is my question clear? Okay, so just for 3 or 4 minutes, have that chat with somebody near you. I'm curious if anyone would be willing to just share the example they talked about. Not required at all, but just the opportunity. Anyone willing to share?
It's not my experience here because this is my first week. I'm a researcher.
Okay.
But there was, at the beginning, when I started being a researcher, there was this anxiety of...
Not here, but some other place.
Not here.
Okay.
There was this anxiety of having the research report perfect. Like
Yes.
all the data, all the recommendations, all the new designs, all the proposals, everything perfect, right? And then, when I decided to drop that and say, what I care is about the product, I care about the PMs, I care about my developers and moving things forward. And I don't care about having an amazing report, an amazing piece of academic research,
So helping the PMs move things forward.
Yeah.
That's what mattered.
Yeah.
The perfection of the report didn't matter. The report was there to help the PMs move things forward along the development process. So this is a great example of a punchline. Before I move on, here's the punchline. You may need to do less than excellent work in order to do an excellent job. I want everybody in this room to think about doing an excellent job, and everyone to think about doing an excellent job. And in order to do an excellent job in, for example, moving things along with the PMs, to do an excellent job at that, you may need to permit yourself to do a little bit less than excellent work, and that can be really, really hard. What I'm asking you to do, though, is to have the sort of intellectual sophistication and the maturity to decouple the work from the job. And importantly, and here's the real psychological punch, to decouple the work from yourself. To say, this is my work, not me. I'm an excellent human being, and as an excellent human being, it may be that I need to produce less than excellent work. So we all are constantly on that journey of decoupling ourselves from our work. The second paradox. In order to have more collaboration, you need to have less collaboration. And in particular, in order to have the kind of collaboration that helps, you need to collaborate less. Some of the research that I did for this book, and here's an anecdote. talked to somebody who worked at a big company, who's a senior director at a big company, and he said, I surveyed everybody on my team, and I got the average of the following variable: number of hours per week spent in standing meetings, regularly recurring meetings that on Sunday night, your week has these meetings in them already. And the number that for people on his team was 22. I'm not sure what it would be for you, if that would be high or low for you for 22 hours. Here's the problem, though. These 22 hours of standing meeting, they were mostly, by definition, by being standing, regularly recurring, were with people who they knew, with friends, you might say, people in the inner circle. That's collaboration. We want to celebrate collaboration. Collaboration is a virtue. Work more with others. Play well with others. Except when your collaboration muscle is exerted in spending more time with the people you work with and who think similarly to you, it ends up giving less space and time for the more helpful collaboration across boundaries, across borders, to people who think differently than you. And it turns out that the animating force behind this, the driving force behind this, is that it just feels good to be around people who think like us. It's so soothing. It's like a nice, warm, cuddly blanket to be surrounded by like-minded people. It's just this safe, snuggly environment to say, yes, I don't even have to try. I can just say, this is what I think. Oh, you think that too? Oh, yes, this feels so good. We all think the same thing. You're not a bad person. You are a person if you behave in that way. You are a human being. We are social. We are social species, and we tend to cluster and clump in these like groups. So here's the big point. What's preventing you from collaborating is collaboration. It's not individual. It's often presented as, stop being such a lone ranger. You're not in the Lone Star State. Don't be the Lone Ranger. Don't be just an individual rugged cowboy. You need to spend more time working with others. Actually, that's not the dynamic. If you look at the research, what's soaking up the time that could be spent in collaborating with other folks, what's soaking up the time is collaborating with people like you. And so there's a simple punchline, which is, in your collaboration, you should do less spinning and more hopping. And spinning is just more meetings with the people who you work with, who are on your team, and more hopping across other teams. A.G. Lafley, very successful CEO at Procter & Gamble, one of the things he did when he got to the top is he said, we are constantly internally looking at process, talking about process, designing process to look at the process, and evaluating things in a very process-friendly way. And as we're doing that, we're looking at each other, and our backside is facing the customer. And when our backside is facing the customer, when all our stuff is internal, intrinsic, we're not getting enough real life, hard data from the real world. There's a phenomenon, if you look across species, called the baitball. So fish school together when faced with a predator. Gazelles form a herd when faced with a predator. We human beings can also cluster together and clump together because it feels safe. Too often we collaborate to hide, not to accomplish. And so my suggestion is that we sort of divert some of that energy from collaborating with like-minded people to collaborating across. Was I reading your body language? Did you disagree with something that I said?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
No? Okay. All right. Maybe you. Okay. Because I love disagreement. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm a big advocate for. One of the things that's the hero of the book is challenge and pushback. And so since let me make that explicit. We've been together now 25 minutes. We're good friends. So push back or challenge at any point.
But are you saying that you need to do both?
Yeah, there we go. There's Sam. So Sam says, are you saying you need to do both?
Yeah, means that facing the customer as well as facing internally.
Yeah,
So-
what I'm saying, to be clear, is do less of the thing where you're collaborating more with people like you, and more of the thing where you're collaborating with people less like you. And the less like you that use your own judgment as to what that means in your particular context. I am not a zealot. I'm one point of tipping sacred cows is anti-zealotry, right? So I'm not a zealot saying you can go all the way to one. I am saying right now the balance is a little bit out of kilter, is my suggestion. So do you think, does that happen here, the notion of collaborating within your group, perhaps to the detriment of collaborating across groups, spinning instead of hopping? Some people are nodding their heads yes. What are some successful ways to avoid that? Has any of you seen that? Yes?
On my team, we've done collaborative OKRs. So you have to have an OKR that's based on someone else's team, and that person on that team has to have the same one as you, so that you work on it together. That tries to keep you outside. You still work with your immediate team clearly to get the work done, but it just gives you kind of a goal to work with somebody on a different team with a different perspective on a project or a topic or a solution that kind of just gets you out of your comfort zone.
Okay. I think that's good. That's a good example. It parallels the Pixar example of a purposeful attempt. That is one of the primary things that I advocate is a bit more purpose. If you just go with the tide, you will end up collaborating with people like you in a way that's perhaps more helpful. Have purpose and intent to say, I need to reach across borders. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, make standing meetings literally standing.
Yeah.
Because that naturally limits the amount of time you spend doing it.
Yes. Yes. Put the physiology on your side. And often when you're sitting down, the physiology is not on your side. So there may be like a little part of your brain, the unhealthy part of your brain that says, come up with excuse to stay in this comfy chair longer. And that part of your brain, well, I have another point I'd like to suggest. And that's not healthy, helpful behavior. One last thing about collaboration. Talk to me about brainstorming. I'm interested. Is brainstorming good?
To a point.
Brainstorming is good to a point? Is brainstorming bad? Raise your hand if you think brainstorming is a bad idea, proven to be unhelpful. It's like one person. Tell me more about your point of view.
I just read an article, and it linked to several other findings that brainstorming, you tend to revisit the same points and clump your way to it.
Yeah.
If you go for the safe idea, because everyone is saying yes.
Yeah. So let me be clear about my point of view, and it is based on some of the findings that you talk about. There's a woman at Berkeley who's done a lot of this research. Brainstorming is bad. It destroys value. It doesn't add value. Now, brainstorming is good at the following thing. It's good at it's fun. It's good at as a kind of team builder. You know, it's cheaper than going go-kart racing, and can make people feel good. Like, yeah, let's just come up with a bunch of ideas together, and it feels good. So it's good for that, but it's not good for work in terms of you don't produce better ideas by brainstorming. And in particular, so this is a surprise to some of you. The research is so clear, yet the myth still persists that brainstorming adds value. It's 50 years old, the research that shows that brainstorming is bad. So let me be clear, like in research-based way, what do I mean by brainstorming? I mean getting a bunch of people in a room and saying, what do you think we should do about this problem? What's your idea? What's your suggestion? It turns out that that's a less utility in that approach than having individual people separately, on their own, quietly, write down and come up with a list of ideas. You end up with fewer ideas and lower quality of ideas when you get people together. And let's just get our heads together on this one, because there's this myth that just more is better than less. We need more people in there, and let's brainstorm ideas. And just the research doesn't bear it out. The woman's name at Berkeley, her last name is Nemeth. I see some of you are interested in this. It's Nemeth. Nemeth, Charlan, Charlan is the first name. So if you were to just search for Nemeth, you'd see that. There's another particular thing within brainstorming that is unhelpful, and it's a myth, and that's the notion that you shouldn't criticize other ideas. You know, this is a magic room, this is a brainstorm, we're just going to put ideas on the table. Again, that's really good for maximizing likability, but it's not good for maximizing productivity, for getting the ideas. And I would say to leaders, a lot of the work that I do is with leaders, it's the leader's job to make it safe for people to criticize each other's ideas. If you have a situation where we must just say nice things about each other's ideas, you have an absence of leadership. Because that's an absence of the kind of rigor that's going to lead to good work and good thinking. If you're not able to actually have an environment where people can criticize each other's ideas. So individually, be individually strong, collaborate reluctantly, and collaborate towards some purpose. Bring in other people's ideas, and then beat the heck out of each other's ideas. And this only works, though, in an environment where you trust each other, and you're okay criticizing each other's ideas. So that's the second. I'll go with the third and final before Q&A. Then I'll do one last thing after Q&A, then book signing. So the third is creativity. So to get more creativity, you need less creativity. And in particular, to get the kind of creativity that is pragmatic and useful, you need less of the kind of creativity that is, and I'm going to be very specific here, narcissistic. The creativity is an excuse often to hide narcissism. So we as individuals want to put our fingerprints on the world. And this drive is often counterproductive. The drive to put our fingerprints on the world is counterproductive. We want to create something new because it feels good, and we're driven to make our mark and to leave our mark on the world. And in some cases, the particular part of the world doesn't need that mark. Now, I am not suggesting that people not pursue their passion when it comes to art, or make your mark on the world in that way. What I'm saying is, again, have the intellectual rigor, the sophistication, the maturity to decouple that from what is needed in this particular work project and say, actually, in this case, what we need is the same thing we've always done. Even though that doesn't feel as gratifying to my ego, that's what the work needs. It's for us to simply repeat what we've done before. Innovate when you need to, not when you want to. So here's a quick example of some narcissistic creativity. And it was done in Silicon Valley, in this neck of the woods, in 1996 by me. So here's my narcissistic creativity as a young kid. I would be 24 in 1996, and I'm working for this company. In 1996, they had Vivo had the first compression algorithms to digitize video. It was based on the work that Dr. Stefan Eriksson did at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. So Dr. Stefan Eriksson had many of the first patents in the compression of video into digital code. And he started out in the early 90s by trying to turn his research into video conferencing. And that wasn't going along so well. In the meantime, he's seeing companies like Netscape getting funded at these huge valuations, and he's saying, look, I've got this great product, I want to become a web company. So I was part of the team to help him market that and publicize that and say Vivo is a web company. And what we did in spring of 1996, we went to something called Spring Internet World. Anybody who was around back in the early, sort of right as the bubble's starting to get inflated in '96, Spring Internet World. We said we're gonna take you to Spring Internet World and tell the world about your ability to put video over the web, which this is in the days of 28.8 modem, so it's very primitive technology. But he could do it, just barely. Could get video over 28.8 bandwidth, narrow band, into the home. So, and he didn't have much money at all. But he was running out of money. So we go to Spring Internet World, and when we see this logo, I don't know about you, but when I saw this logo in particular, I didn't just see Vivo. I being a very creative boy, I saw Vivo Man. So we are going, because I thought like the O is like a mouth, and the V's are like eyes, and the eyes kind of a nose, like a little bit. You see it's a little anthropomorphic. Look, I'm telling you, this is a bad idea, right? This is the whole point. This is a bad idea. But man, I wanted to help. So I sold Dr. Stefan Erickson on, we need, at Spring Internet World, we don't need to just have a booth. We need to have Vivo Man. And we need to have Vivo Man like walking around the trade show, getting people to go to the booth. This is the world a little bit in 1996, and saying, look at the first ever video compression algorithm. So this is Vivo Man, and he's a very nice Swedish scientist, and he said, okay, fine, do it. So I'm in Boston, and he's in Cambridge. I'm in Boston, and we design this thing. We staff an actor out here, somebody from San Jose State, I think, who's going to be the actor who's going to walk around. And we had this costume made, purple spandex costume to fit the purple logo. And we booked the actor. When we got out here, it turns out the actor, we built the suit for someone very, very tall and broad shoulders, like a superhero, right? But the actor, there was some miscommunication, and the implementation of the idea didn't go so well. And the actor was not shaped in the way. This is, I don't have a picture of it, but this was, just from a quick search, if you want to get a sense, this was sort of the, that was basically, that gives you a sense of what we were dealing with. So this was the picture of Vivo Man. This is actually what happened. And then, so we get our Vivo Man in there, and I'm red-faced with embarrassment. It's not going well as we get Vivo Man there. And we're told, as we get him onto the show floor, so this very serious woman stops me and she says, do you have a character appearance license? Because there's a $10,000 character appearance fee. And we did not, and I did not know about that. So I had to escort Vivo Man out to the bus stop where people were dropping off the attendees, because that was the best we could do. So that was, as my 13-year-old daughter would say, that was a fail. That did not work, having Vivo Man there. And it was ridiculous. It was just one of these things that was, it's an exaggerated example, right? It's an exaggerated example, and I'm making fun of myself. I think we can all find examples where we did something, you sort of start falling in love with the idea, and the idea takes inertia of its own, and it's the coolness of the idea and versus what is needed. Let me tell you what worked there, though. What worked is the simplest, easiest thing in the world. We, at our little booth space, we said we will be Vivo Video News, and we're going to copy CNN. Instead of CNN, we're VVN, and I called myself a senior producer for VVN. I contacted people before the show and said, we want to interview you, get your thoughts on the internet, and this will be the first ever what we call, we hadn't heard the word before, maybe it had been used before, but we say this is going to be the first ever webcast. And so we were using this word webcast in 1996. He's got the first compression algorithms. We interview people for VVN, and they come to the booth. And the whole goal of this was to get an infusion of funding so that the company could live and potentially be acquired. And there was a company called Real Audio at the time that later became Real Networks that did that weekend an infusion of capital and then acquired Vivo. And that's how Real entered the video space, was by acquiring this, and it was Dr. Stefan Erickson's algorithms. Here's the point. Copying CNN was the right thing to do. It was a simple idea, like, okay, why don't we cover the event using our technology? Duh. There's no, like, you don't get an award for being so super creative. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Here's who was creative, by the way. Dr. Stefan Erickson, who created the algorithms. That was creative. Like, that was, the fact that we were going to come up with this nonsense to try to promote it with some crazy character was just silliness. It was just a waste. So that's an example of how easy it is to fall into the trap of narcissistic creativity instead of creativity that leads you, that's driven by some business outcome, which is let's be acquired. We had, by the way, there's only, I think, 8 people who came by our booth to be interviewed, but all 8, it was Microsoft was there, Real was there, HP was there, and then some of the old line VCs, what were big VCs back in '96. But those were the right 8 people. I mean, we're at a trade show, and Vivo Man, we think it's cool because he's going to be seen by 20,000 people. It was those 8 people that mattered. So the punchline about creativity is the theme of the day. Have the intellectual sophistication, the intellectual rigor, and the maturity to say creativity in and of itself is not good, but here's more to the point. Creativity is often a mask. It's a mask that excuses narcissism. Creativity is a mask that excuses narcissism. You say, I'm not being ridiculously narcissistic. I'm being creative, and I am told that creativity is a value and a virtue. Beware. Be very careful about the unintended consequences of creativity. As I said, I've got one more thing that I'm going to close on. But first, I'd love to hear questions, comments, pushbacks. So, yes, please.
How do you balance the risk of creativity for its own sake or an automated hero syndrome with the need to sort of be disruptive? Like if everyone else in your industry is approaching the same problems with the same old thing, how do you make sure that you're not the one who's left behind and someone else finds that new thing?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of disruption as a process. And so if you read Clay Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and talked about the Innovator's Dilemma and disruptive innovation, one of the things he talks about is that being disruptive is a process. And you can't guarantee that you will disrupt an industry, but you can increase the chances that you will disrupt an industry by following a few steps. And so I'm a big believer in what he did in '97 with Innovator's Dilemma and in 2003 with Innovator's Solution. In Innovator's Solution in particular, he talks about what is the job to be done by the customer and how am I going to really understand the job that's going to be done. And in some cases, that means excellence can get in the way. I need to be the good enough solution on one dimension so that I can outperform on another dimension. I think that kind of rigor is more helpful than a sort of a general permissiveness about creativity. So that's my answer. Is I would say you should be disruptive and you should zag when other people are zigging, and that doesn't mean therefore let's just be creative. Is that a?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. That was a good question. I like the question. Come on, give me some more questions. And it doesn't have to be that good. Let's lower the standards on questions. This is the problem with excellence. So the lead-off question is this really smart, informed question. And so now people are like, well, I'm not going to ask anything there. Like, somebody ask a question. This is a challenge in the spirit of how unhelpful high standards and excellence can be. Somebody answer a question that you might feel just a tinge of shame even in asking. Like, what did you mean by that? Or, wait, I don't understand. Maybe I'm the only one. Yeah.
It's more of a comment. I noticed that when I send the document to collaborate with others, if I intentionally make it lower quality, that I get a lot more collaboration.
Yes.
And when it's pretty and has great table of contents and everything there, I barely get anything. So I intentionally always make sure that whenever I seek actual input, to just have placeholders for people to fill it in, and that works.
Yeah, I love that approach. That idea of, and you can announce it. You can say it's not like you need to be manipulative in any way to say these are my quick, rough thoughts. Your feedback and input is critical here. Just more reps, more revisions. That's a great way to combine the excellence and the collaboration piece. What else? Yes, Sam.
Say your manager asking for excellence.
Yes.
Your whole team member asks for excellence. And then based on what you just told us, less is more.
Yeah.
How would you deal with that?
So what if the manager's asking for excellence?
Yeah.
You simply say, I read this book by Jake Breeden, and he... No, of course not. I think it's the point of the difference between the job and the work. So this woman who she had to leave early, her point was, her job was to help PMs move the development cycle, move products through the development cycle. That's her job. And I would hope that her boss wants her to do an excellent job of that. And so if her boss is giving her a hard time about the research reports, like, wait a minute, you only have 4 original citations here. Why don't you, this other person had 14 original citations on the research. Are you sure you had enough sources? I would want some conversation to say, okay, help me understand here. Let me make sure we're on the same page about what's the job. What are we really trying to achieve so that you're managing up, and in fact, you're leading up. Because if you do it right, you're going to help your boss, expand the thinking. You have to do it in a way that's not defensive. And it could be that your boss is way ahead of you. It could be that your boss is thinking, actually, the job to be done is something different than what you just said. And so then you're having a good conversation. But I think this to me, the most helpful strategy is the difference between the word job and work. Just to decouple job from work, and to say, we got to do an excellent job. I am on board with excellence when it comes to the job we're trying to do. So big picture here, what's the job? Now, where are some incremental steps, some inputs, so to speak, where actually I want more lower quality inputs than just a few big high quality inputs. I would have that kind of conversation. Yep.
Question around your comment that brainstorming is bad.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, in that research, is there any differentiation between the psychology of teams in regard to typology? So if you have a team of introverts, say on Myers-Briggs,
yeah.
then I totally get it.
Yeah.
What if you have a team of extroverts where actually the way they think is thinking out loud and bouncing ideas off each other?
Yeah. No, this research did test for that. I mean, it wasn't culturally bounded, and it wasn't bounded by personality or preference. So, I mean, the empirical answer to that question is that didn't affect it. But we can go deeper into looking into this research. How about one more? Yep.
Following up on that, I've seen brainstorming happen where it was very successful, very productive, when it follows a strict process that outlines exactly what's the goal of each stage and how to structure and capture the input and all of that. So I'm not sure if the research that you're referring to was just open-ended brainstorming that just people do whenever they get together, or brainstorming that companies like IDEO does, where that's actually their value and that's how they sell themselves.
Yeah, well, IDEO in particular has innovated in the way. So the short answer to your question is yes, structure matters. And the big enemy is this kind of general reflexive notion of what we need is more people, more ideas, more permissiveness about ideas, and if we just get everybody sharing stuff, then we'll be in a good place. That's the boogeyman that I want to take down, right? So if you're talking about an approach where individuals have accountability and responsibility to each come up with some of their own ideas, and then you share, the so-called nominal group technique is one example of that. Then I think I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. I think we're on the right page. This particular research was really focused on which is better. If I've got 8 people, do I get them in the room trying to come up with the answer, or do I separate these 8 people and then look at what comes out? And the answer over and over again was you separate them. If you talk about a technique that says, well, what if we can have the best of both worlds? Okay, then I'm hopeful. And I think that hasn't been tested in the way that the other part has been. So I want to end with one last thing. May I? Thank you. Thank you, Sam. And the rest of you, I assume by your silence. Silence is consent. So David Foster Wallace told the story in 2008 at a graduation speech at Kenyon College. 2 young fish swimming along, bobbing in the water, happy as can be, passed by an older fish. And the older fish says to the younger fish, these 2 younger fish, "Howdy, boys." And they say back, "Hello, sir." And the older fish says, "The water's nice today, isn't it?" And they say, "Yeah, yeah." And then as the old fish passes, one of the young fish says to the other young fish, "What the hell is water?" And the point that David Foster Wallace was making to the college graduates was that you're swimming in water so long, you don't even know what you're swimming in. When you're surrounded by it, it's so hard to see it and examine it critically from a distance. And that's the nature of sacred cows. And I would say it's an even greater threat for folks who are experienced professionals like yourself. These sacred cows, like, what we need is more creativity, higher standards, more collaboration. When you're swimming in these things so long, so often, so deeply, it's hard to recognize when they may be backfiring. So my advice is to just look at your world with a healthy bit of critical distance. Thank you very much for your time.